everybody, today I'm talking to you about the key to scheduling appointments over the phone. This key is something I call the pivot. What is the pivot? Well, it's very simple. It's the process of pivoting to the appointment. Now, why is this so crucial? When you're on a call and your goal is to schedule an appointment, there are really these two phases that you go through that are both really crucial in the way that you deal with them. The first phase is just having a conversation. Like, you got to grab their attention enough to get them on the phone and keep them on the phone for like 5 or 10 seconds. We've all been there. If you've done phone sales ever, you understand this concept of trying to grab their attention, maybe a little small talk, maybe a more direct approach, depending on the script. But as long as you have a good script, that part is kind of a given. So if you're not even getting people to ask you questions, if you're not even getting people interested at all, like if less than 10% of the contacts you make are interested at all, your script is just terrible, or you're coming across as negative and depressed rather than coming across as excited, upbeat, and a professional and an expert. So, you have to come across the right way with the right attitude, but then in addition to that, you have to have a great script. Well, again, I think that is pretty much a given. I mean, if you don't have that, I have other videos on how to create a good script for telemarketing and scheduling appointments over the phone. But what I want to talk today is what comes next. What inevitably comes next when people are interested is not yes, right? We've all experienced this. We're talking to somebody on the phone and they're interested. Do they just say, I'm really interested in that. I would love for you to sign me up. Is that what they say? No, of course not. What do? They ask you a question. It might even be a question with kind of a negative undertone to it, but they're going to ask you a question, well, what do you mean? How does that work? Well, explain that to me, right? They're going to ask you questions about it, right? So when they ask you that question, that is a crucial moment where you're going to do one of two things. You are either going to answer the question and shift the conversation from an appointment scheduling pitch to an education pitch. Well, if you do that, it might sound great. And it's so funny when I listen to telemarketers that are like, I don't know what the problem is. I'm so good at this. Everybody loves me. I have great conversations with people. Everyone connects with me, but I can't get an appointment. The reason is because you're trying to educate them instead of pivoting to the appointment. If you educate them, you're going to give them just enough information to tell you no. Okay? Let me give you a big tip, all right? If you are scheduling appointments on the phone, it is unlikely that you're going to give them enough information in that first call for them to say yes, right? Think about that, right? They need to know a lot. I mean, in order to say, yes, let's move forward, they need to know a lot of information. They're going to have a lot of questions. And the truth is, you probably cold called them out of the blue without an appointment yourself. So they're not in a position mentally or, from a scheduling perspective, they're just not in a mental state right now or a position where they can talk to you for 5 or 10 minutes. That's just not going to happen in most cases. So as a result, they're in this like big hurry and they're like, well, what do you mean? How does that work? Well, let me tell you, the way it works is da, 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 da. Well, they actually aren't even really paying attention to you. They're busy. They have other things going on. You kind of grab their attention initially, but you're going to lose them through education. Instead, what you need to do is pivot to the appointment, okay? What does that look like? What it means is any question, no matter what it is you're going to pivot that to asking for the appointment. So it's going to sound something like this. They say, maybe you're talking to them about a surcharge program. We have a compliant surcharge program, and we can eliminate the fees on your credit card processing transactions while still giving your customers a great choice or whatever. And we'd love to talk to you more about that. And they say, well, what do you mean? How do you eliminate all the costs? That is such a great question, and I can tell just by you asking that this is something that could have some potential for you. So here's what I like to do with your permission. I know I just kind of called you out of the blue here. Would you be available if I was able to swing by tomorrow around 1 o'clock? I'll drop off some information for you, and then, of course, I'll be ready to answer that question in more detail when you're in a position where we can have a little more of a conversation. Does that sound better to you? Or if I'm scheduling appointments for somebody else. That is such a great question that you asked, Susan. Rather than me diving into all the details on this kind of unscheduled call when you didn't even know I was going to be calling you, I know you have other things on your mind right now. Here's what I'd love to do with your permission. I'm going to go ahead and have Bill give you a call. I'm going to use the same name there. That'd be odd. I'm going to have Bill give you a call, and Bill's going to call you. Now, tomorrow he does have some time available at both 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Which of those times would work better for you so he can answer that question for you in depth? So the idea is you've got to pivot to the appointment every time you pivot to the appointment. Now, here's what's going to happen. I've worked with literally hundreds, probably over 1,000 telemarketers at this point. I'm sure it's over 1,000 now. And working with these telemarketers to explain to them how to do this. And inevitably, there's a lot of resistance, right? Because it's like the thing that makes me good as a telemarketer is my ability to connect, I agree with that, okay? But here's the problem, all right? The other thing that makes you really good as a telemarketer is understanding when you are connecting and when you are starting to educate, okay? Let me make this really clear. If you are trying to schedule appointments over the phone, you have only two goals, only two, okay? You are trying to connect with them. You could also call that grabbing their attention, right? But the idea is you're going to connect and then you're going to schedule the appointment. Those are the only two things. That's it. Okay. So you might say, well, I don't want to pivot too early in the call, right? Like right after my opening, I haven't said really anything. And they say something like, well, tell me more about it. I don't want to say, well, actually, rather than telling you more about it, I'm going to schedule an appointment because I haven't connected with them yet. And that's fine. I agree with that. You do have to have a connection with them before pivoting to the appointment. But here's the difference. On an appointment scheduling call, you're only trying to connect. That's it. You're not trying to educate. So minimize the education, maximize the connection. So if they ask you a question and say, well, I mean, that does sound, interesting, but tell me more about it, then what you do is you have your kind of pre-created script that's going to give them that minimum amount of information, right? You say, well, as I'm sure you've heard, there's a lot of compliance rules and all kinds of complicated laws and regulations that have come out. But the short version for you as a business owner is that it's going to allow you the ability now to pass the cost of processing onto the consumer in a way that's actually better for everybody involved and really gives consumers the power of choice as well. And so with all that in mind, I mean, really the only reason I was calling you today is that I would just love to swing by your store, drop off some free information, introduce myself, and give you a business card, because ultimately, if I can save you 90% plus on your credit card processing bill, that's something that's worth a few minutes of your time to have a conversation. Wouldn't you agree? So I had that, again, am I educating them? No, not really. I'm really just, I'm almost confusing them in a way, because I'm really just giving them this really high level information about, I'm sure you've heard about all these really complicated laws and compliance and regulations. So, it's a complex thing. I'm not trying to dumb it down and make it simple. I'm not trying to educate them. I'm trying to connect with them by saying, I'm sure you've heard about these other things, and as a result, I'd love to swing by and talk to you, okay? So make sure you're separating. If you're on a call to schedule an appointment, schedule the appointment. Do not educate them. Don't give them enough information to say no. Okay, because when you give them just enough information to where they can say, oh, I see, you're talking about credit card processing. No, we're not interested. We already have a provider. If you're hearing that a lot, you're doing it wrong. You're giving them too much information, too much education, and that's a bad thing. When you make a script, when you're scheduling appointments, your script needs to be general. It needs to be a little bit complex. It needs to show them that your company knows what they're talking about, but ultimately I've got to pivot. And when they ask those questions, when you get past that main part of your script where you feel like they know enough right now for me to schedule the appointment, schedule the appointment. Pivot, pivot, pivot. If you have people that work for you that are scheduling appointments, train them and say, look, I don't want you to tell people about credit card processing. I don't want you to educate them about the features of the terminal. I don't want you to tell them about all the features of the POS system. Every time they ask a question, I want you to find a way to pivot that question. Say, what a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. Rather than me diving in right now, though, let's leave that actually for Greg. I'm going to make a note for Greg and make sure when he follows up with you tomorrow that he has a great answer for that question. That way, both of you are in a better position where the call is coming, you have more time. So with tomorrow at 1 o'clock p.m. or 4 o'clock p.m., which one of those would work best for you, Bill? Got to pivot to the appointment. If you pivot to the appointment, you're going to get a lot more of them.